This is the OnePlus 5. OnePlus's fifth phone if you count the X and not the 3T, but OnePlus 5 is 6, and they have made 6 phones. Yeah, a confusing naming scheme, but a legendary series of phones. They're all famous for packing the best essential specs of a phone for quite a lot less than the major flagships like Samsung's, LG's, Apple's, and so on. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the 5 major pros and cons of the new OnePlus 5, so let's start with the pros and then move our way into the cons. The specifications found in the OnePlus 5 is like no other phone, flagship or not. It's packing the latest and greatest Snapdragon 835 SoC with the Adreno 540 GPU, paired with either 6 or an astonishing 8 GB of RAM. This means you've got yourself an insanely competent phone if the software is done right, which is my next pro of the OnePlus 5. It's done right, meaning basically nothing's done to it. There's no skin on top of Android, there's no gimmicky features, it's just Android 7.1.1 with some small but useful features added to it. This is how I like my Android to run, but of course, if you're that type of person, more into a phone filled with gimmicks and features at the cost of performance, then by all means look somewhere else. If that's not your piece of cake though, you'll love the OnePlus 5. Everything is extremely quick with no stutters anywhere in the OS. And also because of the huge RAM size of either 6 or 8 gigs, your apps are open much longer in the background and there's no need to clean up the recent apps anymore. I love the experience of the OnePlus 5. My third pro of the OnePlus 5 is the fingerprint sensor, and all I can say is it's freaking quick. Next up is the dual camera system. It's obviously very similar to the one found on the iPhone 7 Plus, and in my house, that's not a bad thing. It's responsive, images look well exposed, and the dynamic range is pretty darn good. It's also got a feature called depth effect, which is basically the same thing as portraits on the iPhone. It adds a blur effect on the background of subjects, and in most cases it does look pretty good, but sometimes the edges around the subject can get blurred as well. It's not perfect, but I'm sure it will get better with some software updates. The final pro of the OnePlus 5 is the battery life and charging speed. Because the use of a 1080p display with no software gimmicks, the OnePlus's 3300 mAh battery holds up very well with about 30 to 40% left at the end of the day, and that's of course with my usage. It will be different for you though, but I'll say that I'm a pretty heavy user. So that's good by itself, but dash charging makes it even better. Dash charging is OnePlus's take on fast charging, and it's the best in the business. You can charge from 0 to 58% in just 30 minutes. It's great. So with the pros done, let's take a look at some of the not so good things. First up is the screen resolution, and before I get the hate thrown at me, I cannot tell the difference between a good 1080p and a Quad HD display. However, the resolution of this phone means it's not ideal for VR. If you don't care about that, which to be honest I don't either, the display is great. It's an AMOLED one, so colors and blacks are very intense, it's sharp and bright enough, and to be honest, I've got no complaints with it other than that it can't be used in VR. My next con is the big bezel size. With the S8, G6 and Xiaomi Mi Mixes out there, the OnePlus 5 might not look as innovative or as new as those phones. It's not a big deal, but just something small to point out. My next con is the speaker. It's easily as good as the ones found in the S8, G6 and so on, but with the big bezels, I think they could have put a stereo pair of speakers instead to stand out a little bit more. Next up is water resistance, or the lack thereof. Most flagship out there nowadays pack IP67 or 68 water resistance, but the OnePlus 5 just don't. Personally, it's not a big deal, but just as the screen resolution and the bezel size, it's just something to point out. My last con with the OnePlus 5 is the lack of optic image stabilization. Sure, it's got electric stabilization, which works good enough in well-lit areas. However, when trying to take those low light shots, you're SOL. So there you guys go, those were my personal 5 pros and cons of the new OnePlus 5. It's honestly one of the best phones I've used and I can't wait to bring you guys the review of it. But the question for this video is, what do you guys think of the OnePlus 5? Let me know in the comment section down below, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.